Have you ever seen someone walk into a room and change the whole story without even realizing it? He showed up late, dressed in worn jeans and work boots, just trying to make it to his daughter's parent-teacher meeting on time. But what he didn't know was the woman standing at the front of that room, the school principal, was about to see something in him that no one else ever had. This is a story about second chances, about kindness that arrives in dusty flannel, about love that doesn't ask for permission, but quietly finds its way into the places we thought were too broken to feel again. If stories like this move you, stories filled with warmth, heart, and healing, consider subscribing to the channel. It means the world to us, and it helps more people discover the kind of storytelling that reminds us how powerful love can be. Now, let's begin. He showed up late and dirty to the parent-teacher meeting, but the principal asked to marry him. The chairs were lined in rows, plastic and squeaky under the weight of nervous parents. Posters of jungle animals with bold, block-lettered values. Kindness counts, be brave, dream big, adorn the walls. The hum of small talk and the faint aroma of dry erase markers filled the room. It was parent-teacher meeting night at Willow Creek Elementary School. Marianne Carter stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, tailored slate gray dress hugging her figure like it had been made for this very night. Her hair, a soft chestnut with faint sun-kissed strands, was pulled into a simple chignon. To the casual eye, she was the picture of composed professionalism. But beneath that calm surface, Marianne's stomach tightened, in the way it always did before these meetings. Part expectation, part fatigue. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:14 p.m. Everyone was here. Everyone except. The classroom door creaked open. A man stepped in, breathless, his hair tousled like he'd driven through a wind tunnel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, in a faded flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up, and worn jeans streaked faintly with sawdust. His boots were dusty, and he smelled faintly of pine and engine oil, something honest and oddly comforting. Every pair of eyes turned to him. "Sorry," he murmured, eyes scanning the room until they found one small, grinning face waving frantically from the third row. "Daddy!" the girl whispered loudly, her joy unable to be contained. He raised a hand in apology to the group, then ducked his head and took a seat beside his daughter, his large hands folded awkwardly in his lap. Marianne didn't miss the way one of the other mothers leaned toward her neighbor and whispered. Nor did she miss the glance from Mr. Callahan, the PTA chair, who looked at the newcomer as if he were a misplaced wrench at a wedding. But she also didn't miss the way the little girl, Emma Holloway, reached out and took her father's hand, with a trust so complete it made something stir in Marianne's chest. She cleared her throat and smiled. "Well, now that we're all here, let's begin." Ben Holloway hadn't meant to be late. He'd been fixing Mrs. Dalrymple's leaky roof, free of charge, because the woman's fixed income couldn't stretch another month. He'd lost track of time. Again. He hated being late. Hated walking into rooms like this one, full of people who had never held a wrench in their lives, who looked at his calloused hands and assumed they knew everything about him. But Emma had been waiting, and she mattered more than anyone else in the room. As Marianne spoke, eloquently, clearly, and with a passion he hadn't expected, Ben tried to focus, but his attention kept drifting. She wasn't like other principals he'd met. She didn't speak like she had something to prove. Her voice was calm, her presence grounding. She made eye contact. She remembered children's names. When she talked about the reading initiative or the music program, she sounded like she believed it could change a life. And Ben realized he believed her too. Halfway through the meeting, Marianne invited questions. A man in a pressed golf polo raised a hand. "What's the school's plan for increasing standardized test scores? I read the math average dropped 6% last year." Ben felt Emma's fingers tighten around his hand. Marianne's face remained composed. "That's a great question. We've made some curriculum adjustments and hired a new part-time math specialist, but we're also looking at the whole child, emotional support, creativity, and confidence. When those are in place, test scores tend to follow." The room nodded with varying degrees of agreement. Ben found himself raising his hand before he quite realized what he was doing. "Yes, Mr. Holloway?" Marianne's voice was polite but curious. He stood, his voice gravelly but steady. "I know I'm new to this, at least to saying anything out loud, but I just wanted to say, I don't care much about test scores. I care that my daughter is excited to come here every morning. I care that she tells me she feels safe and that her teacher listens to her. That, that means everything to me." There was a brief silence. Then someone coughed. A chair squeaked, but Marianne's eyes didn't waver. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," she said softly. "That means a great deal." Ben sat down. Emma beamed. After the meeting, while parents collected coats and half-finished cups of coffee, Marianne walked over to the back of the room where Ben was tying Emma's shoelace. "She talks about you a lot," she said. Ben looked up, brows lifted. "Hopefully good things. She said you make the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the county and that you taught her to fix a lawnmower last summer." Ben chuckled. "She did most of the work. I just handed her the socket wrench." There was a pause. Marianne glanced at Emma, who had scampered off to say goodbye to her teacher. "I'm glad you spoke up tonight," she said. "It reminded me what this job is really about." He shrugged. "I just said what I felt." "Not everyone does," she replied. Another pause. Marianne fiddled with the strap of her clipboard, then offered almost impulsively, "We're short on volunteers for the library restoration this Saturday. Some of the shelves are broken. I heard you're good with tools." Ben blinked. "Who told you that?" She smiled, a little mysterious. "A little bird, with pigtails and chocolate on her chin." He laughed, and something in Marianne's chest eased, for the first time in years. "I'll be there," he said, "as long as I don't have to pass a background check for splinters." She smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. And somewhere in the quiet space between a man in work boots and a woman in heels, something delicate and real began to grow. The morning air held the kind of crispness that only came after a night of honest rain. Maple leaves danced down the sidewalk, their golden red hues catching glints of early sunlight like tiny stained glass windows. At the end of the school parking lot, Ben Holloway climbed out of his pickup truck and stretched his shoulders, wincing slightly at the familiar tug in his lower back. The old Chevy groaned as he shut the door, a sound that echoed in the stillness. He hadn't expected to be back at Willow Creek Elementary quite so soon. In the bed of his truck was a toolbox, a level, a packet of replacement screws, and 2 wooden planks he'd cut earlier that morning. Marianne Carter had asked if he could help restore the library shelves, a project that had apparently languished for months. Truth be told, he wasn't even sure why he said yes so quickly. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, genuinely, like she wasn't just tolerating his presence, but inviting it. Maybe it was because Emma had bounced all morning at breakfast, grinning between bites of cereal, saying, "Miss Carter said you're the best builder she knows." Or maybe it had been a long time since someone had needed him for something more than fixing a hinge or repairing a fence. Inside the school it was quiet, too early for students, but not for staff. He signed in at the front office, nodding awkwardly at the receptionist, who gave him a curious glance, as if trying to place him. When he reached the library, the door was already propped open. And there she was. Marianne was kneeling beside a shelf, wearing a navy cardigan over a pale yellow blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hair was loosely tied back this time, a few strands escaping, softening her usually polished demeanor. She wasn't wearing heels today, just sensible flats, the kind you wore when you expected to be on your feet, doing real work. Ben stood in the doorway for a moment, unnoticed. She was humming quietly to herself. It wasn't the poised, composed principal he'd seen at the meeting. It was just a woman, sleeves rolled, hair a little messy, focused on a stubborn screw that refused to loosen. "Need backup?" he called gently. Marianne startled slightly, then looked up and smiled. "I thought I'd try to be useful before the cavalry arrived," she said, gesturing to the screw. "It appears the bookshelf has other ideas." Ben chuckled and stepped inside, setting his toolbox down with a gentle clink. "Let me take a look." For the next hour they worked side by side. Marianne held wood panels steady as Ben replaced the warped shelf supports. They fell into a quiet rhythm, her handing him tools before he asked, him explaining each step as if teaching a child, not to condescend, but out of habit. His voice was low, reassuring. Her laughter came more easily than she expected. At one point, as he leaned over to drill a new anchor, she caught herself staring. His hands were steady, his forearms tanned and strong. There was something deeply calming about the way he moved. Efficient, unhurried, focused. The kind of man who did things right even when no one was watching. She cleared her throat and forced herself to look away. During a break, they sat on the floor, backs against a row of children's biographies. Ben unscrewed the cap from a thermos and handed her a paper cup. "Coffee?" he offered. She blinked. "You brought coffee?" "Always do," he said. "Old habit from construction days. Want cream or sugar?" She shook her head, accepting the cup. "This might be the kindest thing anyone's done for me this week." He raised an eyebrow. "Tough crowd?" She sighed. "It's not the kids. It's everything else. Budget cuts, endless meetings, parents who think I'm either too strict or too soft. There's this tightrope I walk every day, and lately I'm not sure anyone even notices." Ben was quiet for a moment, then said, "Emma notices." Marianne looked at him. "She came home yesterday and said, 'Miss Carter talks like she sees your heart, not just your homework.'" He paused, then added, "That's not nothing." Marianne blinked, eyes stinging unexpectedly. "That girl's gonna run the world one day," he continued, smiling. "But she'll still remember the woman who told her it was okay to dream big and mess up sometimes." There was silence between them, but the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. After lunch, as they cleaned up the last of the sawdust, Ben turned toward her. "You ever take a break?" Marianne looked at him, puzzled. "You mean, like, now?" "No, I mean in general. A real break. You know, fresh air, no spreadsheets, something besides worrying about everyone else." She smirked. "Doesn't sound productive." "That's the point," he said. "You're allowed to just, be." She considered him for a long moment. "You sound like a man who knows how to be still." He shrugged. "Takes practice." There was another pause, this one slightly heavier. Then, "I was thinking," she said cautiously, "there's a small-town fall fair this Saturday. Emma mentioned she loves caramel apples. If you're free, I mean, if you and Emma want to come by." Ben tilted his head, slightly amused. "Is that a professional invitation, Principal Carter?" She flushed. "It's an unofficial community engagement." He grinned. "We'll be there." As he gathered his tools and slung the box into the bed of his truck later that afternoon, Marianne stood by the library door, arms folded, watching him go. There was something about the way he waved once before driving off, one hand on the wheel, the other lifted in casual farewell. It was simple, undramatic, but something in her chest ached a little when he turned the corner out of sight. For the first time in years, Marianne Carter found herself wondering what it might feel like to let someone in. Someone real, someone kind, someone with sawdust on his boots and a smile that made her forget to check the time. Saturday morning arrived with the scent of cinnamon in the air and the sound of tiny feet skipping across hardwood floors. Emma Holloway was up before the sun, her braids half done and her smile wide as a picnic blanket. She wore her favorite yellow hoodie with the tiny bluebird stitched near the pocket. "For good luck," she had said as Ben helped her tie her shoes. Ben watched his daughter bounce between the kitchen and the front door like an excited spring. "You'd think we were headed to Disneyland," he said, sipping coffee from his chipped ceramic mug. Emma rolled her eyes like only an 8-year-old could. "Dad, it's a school library, with real tools, and Miss Carter will be there." Ben raised an eyebrow. "You like her that much?" Emma shrugged. "She listens, and she smells like flowers. Not the fake kind, real ones." Ben chuckled, ruffling her hair. "All right, let's not keep the real flowers waiting." The library buzzed with quiet energy by the time they arrived. Several children and parents were already inside, stacking books, wiping down shelves, and organizing bins of markers and educational games. Autumn light streamed in through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. Marianne stood near the back wall, her sleeves rolled again, clipboard in hand. She looked up as Ben and Emma walked in. Ben tipped his head in greeting. "Morning." Some morning," she echoed, then crouched to Emma's level. "Hey, partner, you ready for the big build?" Emma beamed. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, your section is over here." Marianne guided her to a small corner where a few kids were sorting through picture books. "Think you can lead the team?" Emma nodded solemnly like a commander taking charge of her unit. Ben leaned against the doorframe, watching the exchange. Marianne had a way of speaking to children. Not at them, not over them, but directly, respectfully. She crouched when she spoke, matched their pace, gave them time to answer. It wasn't just a job to her. It was a calling. He hadn't seen that in a long time. Marianne handed Ben a short list. These are the final shelves we've got to brace today. They're still wobbly and dangerous if a kid tries to climb them. Ben looked it over. Shouldn't be a problem. I picked up extra brackets this time, she added, a hint of sheepishness in her voice. I'm learning. Extra brackets, he repeated with mock solemnity. You really are a fast learner. She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. And I even brought donuts this time. I heard that's how you keep volunteers happy. Ben grinned. Now that's good leadership. The morning passed with a satisfying rhythm. Wood clinking, drills buzzing softly, children giggling in the corners as they found forgotten books they thought had disappeared forever. Emma led a crew of 3 other second graders in creating a reading cave under the window ledge, complete with pillows and a hand-drawn sign that read, "No bullies, no loud talkers, only dreamers." Marianne crouched nearby, organizing science books when she glanced over and caught Ben staring at the sign. Your daughter, she said, might be the next Secretary of Education. Ben smirked. Or president. She already gives better speeches than I do. Marianne hesitated, then spoke softly. She's a lucky girl, you know. Ben's smile faltered slightly. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm giving her enough. Not just clothes and food, but the rest of it. The stuff you don't see. Marianne looked at him then, not at his flannel shirt or his rough hands, but at the weariness behind his eyes. The quiet ache of a man doing his best with no guarantee it was enough. You give her more than most, she said gently. I see it in the way she looks at you. Ben swallowed hard and turned back to the shelf. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, she said. It's just true. By noon, the room had transformed. The once dusty shelves now stood firm and clean, lined with freshly organized books. The reading corner looked like something out of a magazine. Cozy, handmade, imperfect, and perfect all at once. Parents gathered near the back table, sipping cider and chatting. Children lay on their bellies with books open wide, little hands tracing the pages like maps to other worlds. Ben stood with a damp rag, wiping the last of the wood dust from a windowsill when Marianne approached. This looks amazing, she said. Ben nodded. It's starting to feel like a place where stories live again. She smiled at that. You know, I almost canceled this project. His eyebrows rose. Why? Too much work, not enough interest. I figured I'd be here alone, sorting through outdated textbooks and wondering why I bothered. And now? She looked around the room. Now I remember why I said yes to this job in the first place. Their eyes met. For a moment, the noise around them faded. The chatter, the laughter, the rustle of turning pages. All that remained was a shared stillness, quiet and full of meaning. That afternoon, as families trickled out with waves and thank yous, Emma ran up to Ben holding something behind her back. What's that? He asked. She pulled out a small card, crayon-colored with uneven letters. To Miss Carter, thank you for believing in books and people. Marianne took the card with a soft gasp. Emma, this is beautiful. Emma blushed. Dad says books fix people, but you fix the place where books live. Marianne looked at Ben. He smiled just slightly, and something fragile fluttering took flight between them. Later, as Ben packed up his tools and Emma hugged every person she'd worked with that day, Marianne stepped beside him. I was thinking, she began. He looked at her, waiting. There's a fall fair tonight. Local thing. Apple cider, hay rides. You and Emma might enjoy it. He tilted his head. You volunteering us again? She laughed. No, this one's just for fun, and maybe a little dancing. Ben raised an eyebrow. I don't dance. I'll make a note of that, she said with a teasing smile. But maybe I'll see you there. Maybe, he said. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to be seen. The first Monday after the library project arrived quietly, carrying with it the earthy scent of wet leaves and the soft hush that only small towns know in early autumn. Marianne Carter arrived at school just after 7, balancing a cardboard tray of coffee in one hand and a folder full of weekly reports in the other. Her heels clicked a gentle rhythm down the hallway, echoing in the hush before the day began. The library door was still ajar from the weekend, and something drew her in. She paused on the threshold. It looked different in the morning light. The wood shelves gleamed faintly under the soft golden rays streaming through the windows. The new reading nook, the Dreamer's Cave, as Emma had proudly named it, was already sprinkled with a few crayon drawings and a forgotten teddy bear tucked between pillows. But it wasn't the decor that stopped Marianne in her tracks. It was what sat neatly on the checkout desk, a bright red apple, and a folded note. Marianne set her coffee tray aside and picked up the note. It was written in blocky, oversized letters with a pink glitter pen. Dear Miss Carter, thank you for making my school feel warm. I think you're like a book, kind on the outside, but even better when you read the inside. Love, Emma Holloway. Marianne felt something give in her chest, like a crack widening in a long-sealed door. She stood there for a long moment, hand lightly resting over the words, before finally folding the note and slipping it carefully into her leather planner, between pages she never wanted to lose. In room 204, Emma sat with her chin resting on one palm, drawing a map of Friendtopia, a make-believe land where all teachers have wings and everyone eats pancakes on Tuesdays. Ben had dropped her off that morning with his usual lopsided smile and a reminder to be kind and eat all her lunch. But today, Emma was more excited than usual. She'd watched her dad linger at the front gates just a few seconds longer, as if looking for someone. And though he hadn't said it out loud, Emma could feel something changing, not big like an earthquake, but quiet, warm, like sunlight on a window pane. At noon, Marianne slipped into the teacher's lounge and poured herself a cup of tea. She was halfway through checking the week's lunch schedule when Mrs. Young, the third-grade teacher, with a fondness for pearls and pointed opinions, sat down across from her. I heard the library looks incredible, she said, not looking up from her salad. Marianne nodded. It came together nicely. You had that Holloway fellow helping, didn't you? The way she said it, that Holloway fellow, was sharp enough to cut through linen. Marianne kept her tone even. Yes, he donated his time and materials. Couldn't have done it without him. Mrs. Young sniffed. He's unconventional. Marianne set her cup down slowly. He's also kind and reliable and a devoted father. Mrs. Young said nothing, just picked a crouton from her bowl. Marianne stood. Sometimes the people who come in late and dusty are the ones who care the most. She left the room without waiting for a reply. That afternoon, Ben arrived early to pick up Emma. He leaned against the hood of his truck, a thermos in hand, watching the red and yellow leaves spiral down from the trees that lined the school's front yard. It was the kind of quiet moment he rarely allowed himself. He wasn't a man who made space for reflection. There was always another roof to patch, another bill to stretch, another load of laundry to do. But lately, since that library morning, he'd found himself replaying Marianne's smile in his mind like a favorite song he hadn't realized he knew the lyrics to. She made him nervous, not in the clumsy teenage kind of way, but in the way that made him hope again. And that was scarier. He hadn't hoped in years. The school doors opened, and Emma came bounding down the steps, her backpack bouncing with each stride. But instead of heading straight for him, she detoured, straight to Marianne, who was speaking with a teacher by the entrance. Emma tugged gently on her sleeve. Miss Carter, she whispered, did you get my note? Marianne crouched to her level. I did, and it was the best thing I've read in a long time. Emma's eyes lit up, and she leaned in, whispering, Dad says you read people better than books. I think he likes you. Marianne blinked. Emma's grin was mischievous but sincere. You can like him back if you want. I won't mind. That evening, Marianne sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and performance reports, but her eyes kept drifting to the small pink envelope tucked between the salt shaker and her tea mug. She hadn't replied to the note, not in writing anyway, but she had an idea. She pulled a sheet of paper from her planner, the kind with thick cream stock and a soft finish. Her handwriting was always neat, left over from a mother who had once been a calligraphy teacher. She uncapped a pen, thought for a long while, and then began to write. Dear Emma, thank you for your note. Books are some of my favorite things in the world, so being compared to one is the highest compliment I can imagine. You are brave and bright and wonderfully honest. Never lose that. And tell your dad, I like him too. Sincerely, Miss Carter. She sealed the note with a small smile and set it by the door, ready to slip it to Emma tomorrow. Something was unfolding, slowly, gently, like a flower turning toward the sun. And though Marianne didn't know where it would lead, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was simply ready. The fall fair in Willow Creek had a charm that belonged to another era. Paper lanterns hung from power lines, bobbing gently in the cool evening breeze. Local bands strummed guitars from the town square gazebo. Booths lined the sidewalks, caramel apples, kettle corn, handmade quilts, and jars of golden honey. Children darted between hay bales with painted faces and sticky fingers. The air smelled of cinnamon, wood smoke, and roasted peanuts. Ben Holloway stood near the edge of the crowd, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, his eyes scanning for one small figure in a yellow hoodie and another taller one in navy blue. Emma had run off with her classmates minutes earlier, promising to stay where the caramel is. That left Ben awkwardly alone, trying to pretend he didn't feel out of place among the sea of couples and families in nicer clothes and cleaner boots. "Looking for someone?" a familiar voice asked behind him. He turned. Marianne stood a few steps away, her face glowing in the light of the overhead lanterns. She wore a wool coat the color of deep burgundy and a scarf with autumn leaves embroidered in gold thread. Her hair was down, soft waves tumbling over her shoulders. She looked nothing like the woman who commanded a school office, and everything like someone who might have stepped out of a memory you didn't know you'd kept. Ben gave her a small smile, just keeping an eye on Emma. She said something about riding a goat. "I'm pretending that's not literal." Marianne laughed. "It's literal. There's a petting zoo. I already warned the staff." They stood for a moment, listening to the distant squeals of children and the soft twang of banjo chords drifting through the evening air. "You're not with anyone?" he asked, then winced. "I mean, not that you should be. I just figured someone like you." "Someone like me," she teased gently. Ben scratched the back of his neck. "You know, graceful, organized, wears coats that don't have drywall dust in the pockets." She looked at him with something close to fond amusement. "Well, someone like me was hoping someone like you would show up." Ben met her eyes, surprised by the simplicity of her tone. There was no artifice, no coyness, just truth, offered like an open hand. They walked, past the booths, down the quiet side streets where porch lights flickered on with the slow hush of twilight. Their conversation meandered, unhurried, like two people rediscovering language after too long in silence. Marianne told him about her college years in Eugene, where she had once dreamed of being a writer. Children's books, and she said, illustrated, hopeful, whimsical. Then I interned in a classroom and realized the kids were the story. Ben spoke of working construction from 18, traveling between jobs, never staying anywhere too long, until Emma was born and the world turned small in the best way possible. They shared stories of loss too, not in heavy detail, but in glancing mentions. Marianne's husband, Tyler, had died in a car accident 8 years ago. A winter storm, a patch of black ice, and the long, echoing silence afterward. No children, just her, left to rebuild with lesson plans and late-night books. Ben had buried Emily after her illness wore them both thin. He'd been 35 with a toddler, a mortgage, and a garage full of dreams he never got to chase. But he learned how to braid hair and make pancakes that didn't burn. That had counted for something. As they walked, a hush settled between them. Not awkward, but full of unsaid understanding. "You ever think," Ben said finally, "how strange it is that the hardest parts of your life sometimes lead you to the best people?" Marianne glanced at him. "I used to think it was cruel. And now?" She looked up at the stars just beginning to shimmer through the tree branches. "Now I think it's grace. Unearned, unpredictable, but grace all the same." Ben nodded slowly, his hands still in his pockets. "Yeah, that sounds about right." They reached the edge of town where the streetlights faded and the night grew quiet, broken only by the distant sound of laughter and the rhythmic creak of the Ferris wheel turning at the fairground. Marianne stopped near an old bench beneath a chestnut tree, its leaves rustling overhead like the whisper of ghosts. She sat, brushing a few fallen leaves aside, and patted the empty space beside her. Ben hesitated, then joined her. "It's funny," she said after a while. When I first met you, I thought, here's a man who doesn't belong in a place like this. He smiled. Can't argue with that. But I was wrong, she added. You fit here more than most. You don't pretend to be more than what you are. You show up, dust, tools, and all, and you care. That's rare, Ben. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said what he felt. I like who I am when I'm around you. Marianne turned to him, her expression open, unguarded. Then quietly, she reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded note. He opened it, recognized the handwriting, Emma's, and beneath it, smaller, was a line in elegant cursive. Tell your dad. I like him too. Ben stared at the words for a long moment. Then slowly, he looked up at her. Is that true? He asked, voice rougher than usual. Marianne nodded once, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Yes, it is. And in the quiet that followed, with autumn leaves whispering above them and the town aglow in the distance, Ben Holloway, who had spent years fixing broken things, felt something inside him begin to heal. Not all at once, not like a lightning strike, but gently, steadily, like two people walking side by side through quiet streets, towards something they didn't have a name for yet, but both knew was real. It started as a whisper. On a Tuesday morning, just after the second bell, Mrs. Hensley, the PTA treasurer, leaned over to Mrs. Young by the copier and said, Did you hear about Marianne Carter and that mechanic? By third period, the whisper had grown roots. By lunch, it had branches. And by the end of the day, it had woven itself through the halls of Willow Creek Elementary like ivy through an old picket fence. Quiet, winding, persistent. No one said anything directly to Marianne, but she felt it. The slight delay before greetings in the hallway, the second glances, the way a conversation would falter when she entered the teacher's lounge, the expressions that weren't quite smiles from some of the more polished parents, the ones who sat on subcommittees and scheduled organic snack rotations months in advance. She tried to dismiss it. People talked. That was what people did in small towns. But it was harder to ignore when she overheard a teacher murmur, He's not exactly our kind of people, as she walked past the faculty bathroom. Or when the superintendent's assistant emailed her to remind her, subtly, that the school board expected professional discretion in all off-campus activities. Professional discretion, as if love, or the beginning of something like it, was unprofessional. That Thursday, Ben showed up at the school with a new set of wooden bookends he'd made for the library. They were carved with simple patterns, waves and leaves, and finished with a warm honey glaze. Emma had helped paint them. Marianne met him by the office with a tight smile. Hey, he said, holding the small box. Thought these might keep the books from toppling over in that back corner. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, she said, taking the box. They're beautiful. Ben studied her for a moment. You okay? She glanced around. Can we talk outside? They sat on the school's back steps, behind the cafeteria, where the sound of passing cars replaced the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Marianne folded her hands in her lap. There's been some talk. Ben nodded slowly. I figured. You know how this town is, she said. And this school. It doesn't take much. He looked out toward the playground, now empty, save for a stray lunchbox someone had forgotten. So what are they saying? That you and I... She hesitated, then forced the words out. That it's not appropriate, that I'm compromising my position, that you're not good enough, he finished quietly. Her head dropped. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. There was a long silence between them. Not the good kind this time, not the gentle kind that came with ease and understanding. I don't care what people say, Ben, she said finally, but I do have to care what the board thinks. What parents think. This school means everything to me. I can't afford to lose their trust. He nodded again, slowly, painfully. So, what are you saying? I think we should take a step back, just for now, until things settle. Ben let out a breath and stood. You don't owe me anything, Marianne. I get it. It's not that I don't, she began, but he was already walking away. She sat there long after he'd disappeared from view, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her heart aching with the weight of her own words. Ben didn't tell Emma. He couldn't bring himself to. But she noticed. She noticed the way he stopped checking his phone in the evenings, the way he skipped the fall market they were supposed to go to, the way he paused outside the school building before pickup, as if deciding whether to go in or just wait by the truck. One night she asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Ben pulled her into his lap and hugged her tight. "No, Bug," he said, his voice thick. "Not you. Never you." "Then why does it feel like something's missing?" He didn't have an answer for that, because he was asking himself the same thing. A week later, Marianne sat in her office staring at the note Emma had given her, still tucked in the back of her planner. She thought about what she'd said on those back steps, how she'd let other people's discomfort take precedence over something that felt real, felt right. She'd thought she was protecting her job, her reputation. But the truth was, she was protecting herself. From what? From happiness? From being seen? From the terrifying possibility that a man with rough hands and a quiet heart might actually understand her better than anyone ever had? She reached for her phone, hesitated, then dialed. Ben was in the middle of replacing brake pads on a neighbor's truck when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't answer, but he saw the name, and his hand froze mid-reach. "Hello?" There was a pause, then, "I was wrong." He said nothing, his heart beating louder than the wind rustling through the trees. "I let fear speak louder than truth," she said, "and I hurt you. I'm sorry." Another pause, then, softer. "Can we talk?" Ben let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he said, "we can talk." And in the fading light of a Thursday afternoon, the ache between them began to loosen, just enough for hope to slip back in. The rain began just after dusk, tapping against the window panes of the Holloway home in a rhythm as gentle as a memory. Ben sat at the kitchen table, a cooling mug of tea beside him, a pen in hand, and a blank notepad before him. The house was quiet, too quiet for a man who lived with an 8-year-old whirlwind. Emma was asleep upstairs, worn out from a full day of spelling bees and puddle jumping. He should have gone to bed too. He'd patched 2 roofs that day, replaced a water heater, and strained his shoulder hauling lumber for a neighbor's porch. But his body wasn't what kept him awake. It was her, Marianne Carter, the woman who had appeared like a breath of fresh air and now lingered like the ache of something half lost. The phone call they shared last week had been short, polite. She'd apologized. He'd listened. They both said the right things. But afterward, the space between them hadn't closed the way he thought it might. The silence felt different now, thicker somehow. Not cold, but not warm either. Like a door slightly ajar, unsure whether it was being opened or closed. And so, Ben wrote, he didn't mean to, exactly. But as the rain fell, his hand moved. "Marianne, there are things I wish I could have said to you that day behind the school. Things I couldn't find the words for. Maybe I still can't, but I'm going to try." His handwriting was slow and deliberate, the kind forged from years of signing invoices and jotting hardware measurements on scraps of wood. He paused often, crossing things out, rewriting lines until they felt honest. "I've spent most of my life feeling like I was always a little out of place. Too quiet, too messy, too ordinary for most rooms. But when I was with you, I didn't feel that way. I felt seen. And not for the things I do or don't have, but for who I am." He swallowed, glancing at the dark window and his own reflection staring back. "I understand why you needed to take a step back. You've built something good, something meaningful. I'd never want to be the reason you lost that. But I want you to know, I never once felt ashamed of being with you. Not for a second." The letter went on, soft and steady, like a man building something with his hands and heart. When he finished, he folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it in the drawer beside the refrigerator. He never intended to send it, but somehow just writing it made it easier to breathe. The next morning, Emma wandered into the kitchen in her polka dot pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Dad, why didn't you sing last night?" Ben poured her orange juice. "Sing what?" "You always hum something when you do dishes." "I couldn't sleep. It was too quiet." Ben smiled softly. "Sorry, Bug. I had a lot on my mind." Emma studied him with a seriousness far beyond her years. "Is it about Miss Carter?" Ben hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "Because you talk less when you miss someone," she said. "And you've been real quiet this week." Ben knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're a smart one, you know that? Emma grinned. I know lots of things, like, I know where you keep the candy you think I don't know about. He laughed and kissed the top of her head. Go get dressed, you'll be late. That afternoon, while Ben worked on a cracked fence near Main Street, Emma wandered through the school library during her recess. The room was quiet, the way she liked it, smelling faintly of wood polish and paper. She slipped behind the desk where Miss Carter sometimes left her stickers and notes. There, tucked into a drawer, she found a folded sheet of paper with her name written across the front in blue ink. Her eyes lit up. She opened it carefully. Dear Emma, thank you for your note. Books are some of my favorite things in the world, so being compared to one is the highest compliment I can imagine. You are brave and bright and wonderfully honest. Never lose that. And tell your dad. I like him too. Emma folded the letter slowly, holding it against her chest. Then she had an idea. That night, as Ben grilled cheese sandwiches in the kitchen, Emma snuck over to the fridge. She opened the drawer near the bottom, his drawer, looking for the chocolate bar she'd seen him stash last week. But instead, her fingers brushed an envelope. She pulled it out. No name on the front. She peeked inside, read, and blinked. It wasn't candy. It was love, or something like it. And it wasn't meant for her, but maybe, just maybe, it was meant for something. The next morning, Marianne walked into her office to find an envelope on her desk. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Line by line, she read. She didn't cry. Not at first. Not until she reached the part about feeling seen, about never being ashamed, about the quiet things that most people didn't have the courage to say out loud. She folded the letter gently, held it in her hands for a long time and whispered, "Why didn't you give this to me?" But deep down, she already knew. Because love, real love, isn't loud. It waits. It hopes. And sometimes, it needs a little help from an 8-year-old girl who believed in letters more than logic. The Willow Creek Fall Showcase was the kind of small-town event that didn't make headlines but lived forever in photo albums and hearts. Folding chairs lined the multi-purpose room. String lights twinkled along the windows. The PTA had gone all out this year. Homemade pies, cider and mason jars, a raffle table with a giant stuffed bear, and a stage framed by hand-painted leaves. Every child from kindergarten through 5th grade had a part. From poetry readings to skits about friendship and recycling, the parents beamed, cameras ready. Some whispered nervously, waiting for their child's turn. Others just soaked in the warmth of the moment. Marianne Carter stood backstage, headset slung around her neck, clipboard in hand. She looked every bit the composed principal, poised, professional, perfectly dressed in a navy blouse and cream cardigan. But inside, a storm. Her fingers still trembled slightly from reading Ben's letter the day before. It was now folded inside her purse like a secret too precious to leave behind. She had read it 3 times that night, once more in the morning, and again during lunch break, each time slower than the last. It hadn't been signed. It didn't have to be. She knew every word had been carved from truth, and it left her aching with something she hadn't felt in years, the terrifying, beautiful possibility of being loved for who she was. From the other side of the room, Ben stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his daughter's yellow sweater folded over one elbow. He wasn't on any guest list, hadn't RSVP'd, and hadn't planned on coming. But Emma had looked at him that morning, eyes wide, and said, "I just need you there. Please?" So here he was. Dusty boots scrubbed clean, hair combed back, the flannel shirt replaced with a plain button-up that still smelled faintly of cedar. He hadn't seen Marianne yet, but he felt her presence like a song in another room, soft, steady, familiar. Backstage, Emma waited behind a curtain, feet swinging slightly in nervous anticipation. Her part was near the end. She wasn't singing or acting. She was reading something she had written, a poem. When her teacher asked the class to write about what made them feel safe, most kids wrote about teddy bears or forts made of couch cushions. Emma wrote something different. Her voice quivered a little when her name was called. She stepped into the spotlight. The podium adjusted down to her height. The room quieted. A few parents murmured, "Oh," under their breath. She held the microphone with both hands like a lifeline. Then clearly and steadily she began. "Some people have houses with big gates and alarms. I have my dad. Some people eat dinners with silver forks and cloth napkins. I eat with my dad, and he always makes me laugh when my toast falls jelly side down. Some people say they're proud of their kids. My dad is proud with me. He doesn't wear a suit, but he wears kindness, and it never goes out of style. He shows up, even when it's hard, even when he's tired. He shows up, and that's what makes me feel safe." The room was still. Then a swell of applause broke over the silence, warm and rising like sunlight after a storm. Some parents wiped their eyes. Others clapped with both hands in their hearts. Ben stood frozen. He hadn't known, hadn't seen the paper, hadn't helped her write a word. But those words, they undid him. He pressed his hand against his chest, grounding himself. Because if he didn't, he might have broken in half right there in the back of that room. Marianne, still backstage, had stopped moving entirely. She hadn't seen the poem either, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly who Emma was speaking to, and suddenly her hands weren't trembling from nerves. They were trembling from clarity. After the performance, the crowd mingled, parents praising each other's kids, students buzzing with leftover adrenaline. Emma was surrounded by friends, each taking turns hugging her, telling her how grown up her poem had sounded. Ben tried to keep to the edge of the crowd. He wasn't good at this part, the small talk, the polite smiles. He had come for one reason, and now that it was done, he wasn't sure what came next, until he saw her. Marianne was walking toward him, parting the crowd not with authority, but with certainty. She stopped in front of him, eyes bright. "I heard the poem," she said softly. Ben nodded once. "I didn't know she wrote that." "I did," Marianne said. "Every word of it sounded like you." He looked down. "She's got a way of seeing things. She gets that from you too." Ben looked up slowly, and for the first time in days, he saw no hesitation in her eyes. No walls, no formal distance. Only a woman who had made her decision. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, "for your letter and for showing up tonight." "I didn't know if I should," he admitted. "You should have," she replied, "and I'm glad you did." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded page. His letter. Well worn now, corners softened. "I don't want this to be a letter you never sent," she said. Ben blinked, unsure what that meant, until she added, "Because I'm writing back. With my own." Then, with a glance toward the stage where Emma still laughed with her classmates, she reached up and touched Ben's face. Just a gentle brush with the back of her fingers. And in that simple touch, Ben understood. Forgiveness had been given. Hope had been returned. And maybe, just maybe, love was beginning. Not loudly, not all at once, but clearly. In a child's voice, in a woman's touch, in a man who had always just wanted to show up. The multi-purpose room at Willow Creek Elementary smelled faintly of lemon polish and pencil shavings. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, just like before. The whiteboard bore a fresh quote in bright marker. "Every child is one caring adult away from being a success story." Josh Shipp. Marianne Carter stood at the front of the room, once again holding a clipboard, once again dressed in quiet authority. Slacks, soft blue blouse, a silver pendant at her throat. But something had changed. In the weeks since the fall showcase, she carried herself with a new ease, a gentleness that came not from giving in, but from letting go. The parent-teacher forum was scheduled for 6 o'clock sharp, and just like before, the room began to fill 5 minutes early. Familiar faces drifted in, PTA members in structured cardigans, dads in windbreakers from their tech jobs in Medford, moms with designer tote bags and pressed smiles. But her eyes scanned for one seat. Table 4, empty, for now. At exactly 6:03, the door opened. Ben Holloway stepped inside. This time he wore a clean jacket over a flannel shirt and jeans that looked freshly laundered. He didn't rush. He didn't shrink. He offered a respectful nod to a few of the parents who turned to look, and sat in the same chair he had weeks earlier, beside Emma, who beamed up at him with the pride only an 8-year-old could wear so boldly. Marianne's heart thudded once, hard enough to catch her breath. This time no one whispered, or if they did, she didn't hear it. She saw only him. And when she began the meeting, her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to him more than once. Not for reassurance, for connection. Ben sat quietly as Marianne spoke, but he wasn't listening to statistics or budget updates. He was watching the woman in front of the room, how her hands moved when she described the new literacy program, how her smile grew when she mentioned student creativity, how she glanced down at her notes and then back up, always grounded, always present. He could tell she'd been through storms. You don't learn to speak with that much calm unless you've had to navigate rough waters. But what amazed him wasn't her poise. It was the softness beneath it, the way she looked at the kids, the way she let herself be moved, the way she'd taken Emma's words and let them guide her back toward him. He hadn't known a heart could reopen so gracefully. When the meeting ended, parents clapped, some asked questions, and a few drifted off to get a head start on dinner. Emma tugged on Ben's sleeve. "I'm going to go help Miss Carter clean up the projector," she said. "She always forgets to turn it off." Ben smiled. "Tell her I'm proud of her." Emma tilted her head. "You going to tell her that yourself?" He chuckled. "I might." As she skipped off, Ben rose slowly, letting the last few stragglers file out. He waited near the bookshelf where he'd once fixed a broken bracket, where this had all started, and then she was beside him, not in a rush, not with formality, just there. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice quiet. "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "Table 4 is kind of special to me now." She smiled. "It's becoming legendary." They stood in the empty room for a moment, the silence warm and full. "I was nervous tonight," she admitted. "You didn't look it." "I was," she said, "but not because of the meeting." Ben's brow furrowed. "Then what?" "Because you were here, and I wanted you to see me the way I see you." He turned toward her fully then. "And how is that?" She swallowed once. "Steady, strong, kind, the kind of man who builds things with his hands and his heart, the kind of father who teaches more with a hug than most do with a lecture." Ben's throat tightened. "You don't have to say that." "I do," she said, "because for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid to say what I feel." She paused, then added, "I used to think love had to look a certain way. Tidy, polished, expected." She looked down at her hands. "But you've shown me it can be different. Honest, unassuming, strong enough to carry silence, and soft enough to hold a child's heart." He reached for her hand, gently, as if asking permission. She let him take it. "Marianne," he said, voice low and full, "I'm not perfect. I fix things, but I break plenty too. I worry. I doubt. I've got a truck with a stubborn engine and a daughter who thinks I can do no wrong." She squeezed his hand. "She's not the only one." He smiled then, that quiet, lopsided smile that had undone her more than once. "So what now?" he asked. Marianne looked around the room, the chairs, the whiteboard, the words still lingering in the air from the quote at the start. And then she looked back at him. "We make space," she said. "For what?" "For whatever this is," she replied. "For second chances. For small beginnings. For the kind of love that shows up in work boots and builds a life one moment at a time." That night, as Ben and Emma walked home beneath a sky filled with stars and the smell of damp earth, she looked up at him and asked, "Did you tell her?" Ben glanced down. "Tell her what?" Emma rolled her eyes. "That you love her." He chuckled. "No, not yet." "Why not?" "Because sometimes," he said, "you don't need to say it to mean it." Emma considered that. "You're still going to say it though, right?" Ben looked ahead, where the porch light of their house glowed like a promise. "Yeah, Bug," he said, "I think I will." Snow had come early to Willow Creek. By the first week of December, the rooftops were dusted with white, and the tall pines lining Main Street looked like someone had sifted powdered sugar over their branches. Twinkle lights blinked from every shop window. Children walked home bundled like marshmallows, their laughter puffing into the cold air. At the elementary school, the library windows glowed with warm light. Inside, the old room had been transformed yet again, this time with garlands of construction paper snowflakes, handmade ornaments, and a small fir tree Emma and her classmates had decorated with glitter, glue, and pure determination. Ben stood in the middle of it all, looking slightly out of place in his heavy coat, holding a toolbox in one hand and a flat wooden box in the other. "Are you sure I can just leave this here?" he asked. Marianne nodded, her hands tucked inside fingerless gloves. "This is your space too, Ben. You helped build it." "I just fixed a few shelves." She smiled. "You fixed more than that." Ben looked away, clearing his throat. He had been coming to the school often lately, sometimes to volunteer, sometimes just to bring Emma lunch, and sometimes just to see her. It had become natural, easy, but today felt different. There was something folded inside his chest he hadn't dared open. Not until now. The kids had gone home early for the winter recess, and the school halls were nearly silent. Marianne had stayed behind to finish up some paperwork and check in on final reports. Ben, as always, had offered to help with whatever needed doing. What she didn't know was that the wooden box he carried wasn't for repairs. He set it down on the low table in the reading nook, the one where Emma had once declared, "Only dreamers allowed." Marianne watched him kneel, open the box slowly, and lift out what looked like a plaque. Though unlike any plaque she'd ever seen, it was handcrafted, smooth oak, sanded to a soft sheen. The edges were carved with tiny leaf patterns, and at the center, wood burned with care, were the words, "The Dreamer's Corner," for the kids who believe, and the grown-ups who remember how, in honor of Emma Holloway and Miss Carter. Marianne's breath caught. Her fingers lifted to her lips, her heart stilled. She knelt beside him. "Ben, this is beautiful." He looked at her, earnest and just a little nervous. "I wanted to give something back. You and Emma, you made a space for me here. I just wanted to say thank you." She touched the plaque with trembling fingers. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she whispered. They knelt in silence, the soft hum of the heating vent the only sound between them. Then slowly, Ben reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet bag. He didn't open it, just held it in his calloused palm, thumb resting gently on the drawstring. "I wasn't sure if this was the right time," he said quietly, "or the right place. But then I thought, what better time and what better place than where everything started?" Marianne froze. Her eyes moved from the bag to his face, and for a moment all the air seemed to disappear from the room. Ben opened the bag and revealed a simple wooden ring. The grain of it was warm and golden, smooth to a perfect circle. "It's not much," he said. "I made it from the backboard of an old school chair, the kind they used when we were kids. Thought it was fitting." Marianne blinked back the tears she didn't expect. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He nodded. "I am. But you didn't even ask," she said, laughing softly through the tears. He smiled. "I was getting there." He took her hand. "Marianne Carter, you've seen me on my worst days, and somehow made me feel like I was worth loving anyway. You've given my daughter a voice, and given me something I didn't think I'd ever find again, a future to believe in. I don't have a lot, but what I do have, I want to share it with you, every last bit of it." He looked up, eyes steady, heart open. "Will you build a life with me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the ring in his hand. The wood so ordinary, so meaningful. It wasn't about diamonds or grand gestures. It was about roots, about something made with care, with intention, with love. She thought of the years she'd spent alone, afraid to hope again. She thought of the evenings in her office, the silence of her home, the ache of missing something she could never quite name. And then she looked at him, at the man who never tried to impress her, only to show up, always. She leaned forward and kissed him, softly, steadily, like a promise. When they parted, she smiled. "Yes, Ben Holloway, I will." They stayed like that for a long while, sitting on the library floor beneath the glow of paper lanterns and child-made stars, the ring resting gently on her finger, his hand wrapped around hers. And somewhere between the creak of the heating duct and the distant hush of falling snow, they knew. This was it. Not a grand moment, but a true one. Not flashy, but real. And sometimes that was the most miraculous kind of love there was. The snow fell heavier on the morning of December 23rd, turning the quiet streets of Willow Creek into a winter painting, soft, white, and almost too perfect to be real. Children tugged sleds down sidewalks. Shopkeepers hung evergreen wreaths and brushed powdery drifts from window ledges. The air was brisk, clean, and full of the kind of stillness that only came when a small town slowed down for something sacred. At the elementary school, the lights glowed long past dismissal, not for a parent meeting or a fundraiser, not for a student event or district inspection. Today, the school opened its doors for something entirely unexpected. A wedding. Marianne Carter never imagined she'd walk down an aisle made of gymnasium tiles or say vows beneath a basketball hoop covered in tulle and fairy lights. But as she stood in the teacher's lounge-turned dressing room, Emma beside her in a cream-colored dress with a flower crown made of pine and holly, she realized she'd never felt more ready for anything in her life. "This is crooked," Emma said, adjusting the sash on Marianne's simple ivory dress. "It's fine," Marianne whispered. But Emma shook her head with all the fierce authority of an 8-year-old who took flower girl duties very seriously. "You have to look perfect. He's going to cry." Marianne laughed gently. "You think so?" Emma nodded. "He cries when he makes pancakes. He's definitely going to cry when he sees you." Marianne's heart ached in the best way. She knelt, brushing a piece of hair behind Emma's ear. "I'm so glad you're part of today." Emma smiled wide. "I'm not just part of it. I started it." Marianne pulled her close, and for a moment, they held each other in a quiet that said more than words ever could. In the gymnasium, folding chairs had been draped in white linens and lined with greenery. There was no string quartet, no custom flower arrangements, no grand procession. But there were warm drinks in mason jars, smiling neighbors, and laughter echoing from every corner. The town had shown up, even the ones who once whispered, especially them. At the front, Ben stood in a dark gray vest and a crisp white shirt Emma had picked from the thrift store, because it makes you look like someone on TV who gets the girl in the end. His boots were polished. His hands trembled only slightly. "Ready?" someone whispered behind him. He turned and saw Nate Fields, the town's retired woodshop teacher, acting as officiant. He wore a bolo tie and carried a leather-bound copy of Leaves of Grass. Ben nodded. "Yeah, I am." The music started. Simple piano notes played on the school's old upright, and the doors at the back opened. Marianne stepped forward, her hand gently holding Emma's. She wasn't adorned with jewels or a veil. Her hair was pinned in soft waves, and the dress she wore was borrowed from her late mother's cedar chest. But Ben only saw her, as if everything else disappeared. His eyes stung, just like Emma predicted, and he didn't wipe them. He let them fall. Because this moment, this woman, was worth every tear. When they reached the front, Emma took her place beside Nate, handing him the ring she'd guarded all morning with the seriousness of a royal guard. Marianne stepped beside Ben, her eyes shimmering. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back, his voice rough. The ceremony was brief. Ben and Marianne had written their own vows. Simple, like the lives they led. Marianne spoke first, her voice clear but emotional. "I spent a lot of years building a life I thought looked like success. I poured myself into it, hoping it would fill the quiet. But you, Ben, you brought me peace. Not the kind that hides from the world, but the kind that opens to it. You made me believe in small miracles again, and I promise to show up for you, every day, like you've always done for me." Ben took a steadying breath. "I thought I'd already had my chance at love. I thought the door had closed. But then I met a woman who didn't care that I came in late or covered in sawdust. You saw past the mess, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how much that means to me." The room was still. Even the children were silent. Then Nate smiled, his voice booming with joy. "By the power vested in me by the great state of Oregon and this fine educational institution, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Cheers erupted. Applause. Someone whistled. Emma launched herself forward and hugged both of them at once. Ben wrapped one arm around Marianne and the other around his daughter. And just like that, a family was made. The reception was held right there. Tables pushed together, cookies made by students, hot cocoa in paper cups. Someone put on a holiday playlist, and kids danced between chairs while parents laughed and swapped stories. Marianne and Ben shared their first dance not beneath a crystal chandelier, but under a string of classroom lanterns, their feet moving slowly over tiles scuffed by 1,000 little sneakers. "This is the most beautiful day of my life," Marianne whispered. Ben nodded, holding her close. "Mine too. And it's not just because of the dress," she teased. "Definitely not," he said, leaning in. "It's the flower girl. She's got a knack for matchmaking." Marianne rested her head on his shoulder. "Let's never forget how this started." "We won't," he promised. "Some things, some people, you don't forget." Later, as snow continued to fall and the last of the guests filtered out, Ben, Marianne, and Emma stood beneath the school's entrance awning. The world was quiet again, blanketed in white. Emma tilted her face to the sky. Think it'll stick until morning? Ben looked up. Looks like it. Marianne reached for his hand. Let's take the long way home. He smiled. We've always taken the long way. Together they walked out into the night. No rush, no map, just the steady warmth of each other in the cold. And behind them, through the glowing school windows, Table 4 still stood, empty now, but never forgotten. Spring came slowly to Willow Creek, as it always did. Hesitant at first, like a child stepping into cold water. But by early April, the snow had melted from the rooftops, crocuses had begun to peek through the soil, and the first blush of green spread across the hills like a quiet promise. Ben Holloway stood on the porch of their little cottage just outside town, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one black, one with a splash of cream. Behind him, the front door creaked open, and Marianne stepped out, barefoot, her sweater sleeves pulled over her hands. Morning, she murmured, her voice still soft with sleep. He handed her the cup. Sun's up. I can see that, she said, smiling. What time is it? Just after 6, the birds insisted. They stood in silence for a few moments, watching as the light crept across the lawn, warming the earth, catching on the wind chimes that Emma had made from old spoons and beads. Their mornings had become like this, unhurried, unremarkable in the best of ways. Life didn't feel like something they had to brace against anymore. It just was. Emma's already up, Ben added. She's in the garage. Marianne lifted an eyebrow. Working on her birdhouse empire? He chuckled. Last I checked, she's building one with a skylight. She's 8. She's your daughter now. What did you expect? Modesty? Marianne smiled, but the weight of that word, daughter, settled in her heart like sunlight. It had been 3 months since the wedding. 3 months since she'd gone from living alone to being part of a family that spoke in laughter and quiet glances and dinner table jokes. Every day still felt new. Every moment still made her grateful in ways she didn't always have words for. That afternoon, the school hosted its annual Celebrate Reading Day. And for the first time, it wasn't Marianne standing at the front of the library. It was Emma. She wore a blue headband, a slightly oversized cardigan, and stood behind the lectern with her poem gripped tightly in both hands. The room was filled with kids, parents, and a few volunteers from town. Marianne watched from the back, her arm around Ben's waist, feeling his heart beat slow and steady beside her. Emma cleared her throat and began. Books are where the quiet kids find their loud, where the hurt kids find their healing, where grown-ups remember how it felt to dream, and where love sometimes hides on page 33. There was a hush, then applause, then hugs and cookies and crayons spilled across the library floor as the children moved on to other stations. Marianne lingered near the shelves, running her fingers along the wood grain that Ben had repaired almost a year ago. It was hard to believe how much had changed in that time, and how much hadn't. The wood was still warm, still strong, just like the man who had rebuilt it. Ben joined her, handing her a napkin with a half-eaten sugar cookie. She nailed it. She really did. You've made this place something special, you know. Marianne shook her head. We did. He kissed the side of her temple, then looked over at table 4, the same one he'd sat at during that very first parent meeting, late and dusty and unsure of everything but his love for his daughter. I used to think that table was where I embarrassed myself, he said. Marianne looked at him. He smiled. But now I think it's where my life started again. That evening, they returned home to the scent of dinner warming in the oven, and Emma dancing around the living room with a book in one hand and a sock puppet in the other. Ben sank into the couch, tired in the way only a man who'd spent all morning assembling playground equipment could be. Marianne sat beside him, curling up with a blanket and resting her head on his shoulder. I never asked, she said softly. That ring you made me, the wood, where did it come from? Ben turned his head just enough to look at her. Old school chair, found it in the back of the library storage closet, probably sat under 100 kids over the years. She touched her ring now, twisting it gently on her finger. It's strong, he said, held all that weight and never broke. Just like us. Just like us. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed and the house had settled into the hush that comes only when every soul beneath its roof feels safe, Ben opened his old toolbox in the corner of the garage. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and softened at the edges. The letter he had written all those months ago. The one he hadn't intended to send. He unfolded it one more time, reread the words. Then with a smile he tucked it into a new box, one that now held baby photos of Emma, a dried flower from their wedding bouquet, and the first crayon card Emma had ever made for Marianne. History, evidence, proof that good things grow slowly, quietly, from the smallest seeds. And outside, beneath a star-strewn sky, the wind moved gently through the trees, whispering secrets and beginnings and reminders that not all miracles arrive loudly. Some just sit quietly at table 4 and wait to be seen. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories and reflections mean so much to us. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more uplifting tales of love, kindness, and second chances. Every click helps us grow this community of warmth and hope. From all of us here, thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in the quiet miracles of everyday life.